Welcome back. Welcome back. It's Ed Martin here to Pro America Report. I just was telling our old friend Hans von Spakovsky, who is over at the Heritage Foundation, wears a couple of hats, former member of the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, as election expert, true, but a constitutional lawyer and a great analyst. But I was just telling him, I want to talk about mail-in balloting, and I want to walk through this because one of our listeners emailed me and said, slow down on this mail-in balloting. So welcome back, first of all, Hans, to the program. How are you?
Ed, I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me back.
Well, it's great to have you. So let's tell our listeners. So when we hear all this talk about mail-in balloting and that there's absentee ballots and there's mail-in ballots, there can be mail-in ballots to every citizen. So what are we really talking about? What is the sort of universe of ways you can vote other than showing up in the polling place on Election Day?
Well, look, 45 states and the District of Columbia have absentee ballots. And in about two-thirds of those states, you don't need an excuse to vote by absentee ballot. And what you do with that is you request the absentee ballot from your local election official. They mail it to you, you fill it out, and then you can either mail it back or you can hand deliver it, or a member of your family can hand deliver it. In some states, unfortunately, other people can also come to your front door and offer to deliver it, but we'll talk about it in a second. In about a third of the states, you need an excuse. So if you're physically disabled, you're sick, or you're going to be out of town on Election Day, if you're an overseas military a guy, you can vote by absentee ballot also. But the vast majority of people in those states vote in person. Mail-in balloting, it's the same process as an absentee ballot, except that 5 states, including Oregon and Washington, have switched to an all-mail election. So they don't actually have polling places open. What they do is you don't request a mail-in ballot. They simply mail an absentee or mail-in ballot to every single registered voter in the state. And, of course, the problem with that is that voter rolls are in terrible shape all over the country, including in those states. So they literally have hundreds of thousands of ballots being mailed out to registered voters when that voter doesn't live there anymore or has died or otherwise shouldn't even be on the list.
Right. So what then is ballot harvesting? It's when you're able to go where you know someone is eligible to mail in vote or absentee ballot and get their ballots. Is that what that is?
Yeah, like I said, in every state, you can either mail back your absentee ballot, you can deliver it yourself, or a member of your family can. But in some states, like California, they have legalized vote harvesting, which means that in addition to you and your family, any other third party can deliver your vote. So that means that candidates, people who work for campaigns, party activists, political consultants can all legally show up at your front door and say, hey, I'm here to collect your absentee ballot. I'll deliver it for you. And, of course, the problem with that is that these are all people who have a stake in the outcome of the election. And handing over something as valuable as a ballot to them is a foolish idea because they might change it, they might alter it, they might decide, I work for a Democratic candidate. You've always voted Republican in the past. I'm just not going to deliver your ballot. Or they may try to intimidate and pressure voters to vote a certain way.
We're talking with Hans von Spakovsky about mail-in ballots and ballot integrity, election integrity. So now we've got a situation where we have some states pushing for more mail-in ballots. Some have it already. What's the sort of top 3 problems with it? I mean, I've heard you could say that there's people that may have an interest in persuading people. If the top 3 problems are X, Y, Z, are there 3 solutions to that? Or, are where we already have mail-in ballot, what can we do? Walk us through that, sort of how they match up.
Well, look, the top thing states ought to do, not just for this, but all kinds of voting, is clean up their voter list. Take off people who are dead. Find the people who have moved to other states and gotten registered there so people can't double vote. Make sure you have an accurate list. But the other big problem with it is Yeah, I'm not quite sure how you take care of the problems of making sure that you're not going to get undue pressure, intimidation at your home, unless you ban vote harvesting. You tell folks,
Right.
look, you can mail your ballot back, or you and your family can deliver it, but nobody else is allowed to deliver your ballot. That's the only way I know of to do that. And look, every single bill pushed by Nancy Pelosi in Congress is the exact opposite of that. They want to legalize vote harvesting in every state.
We're talking with Hans von Spakovsky. And I was thinking about how I have a friend of mine who's in Iowa, and they're recent elections, their primary elections, and she was saying that she was going to go in and be present for all the vote opening the ballots and all. But you're kind of too late to the party if you're just witnessing the opening of the ballots, right? Because as you point out, they could be mailed in or carried in or mailed in by somebody who wasn't the real voter and all those. So I'm not sure that solves the problem. What's happening in places? I know you had a piece a couple days ago, Philadelphia, West Virginia. They have voter fraud happening, and they've admitted it. What's happening with the voter fraud movement? Sometimes it feels like that ebbs and flows in terms of the willingness to prosecute. Are we in a period where people are willing to get after this, and they're willing to acknowledge it's happening?
Well, the U.S. attorneys appointed by Trump seem to be willing to prosecute it. There were hardly any prosecutions during the Obama and Clinton administrations because they just weren't interested in doing that. So, yeah, we're at a good time right now, although the fact that the feds are willing to go after it doesn't mean that state prosecutors everywhere are willing to go after it. In fact, a lot of them just tend to ignore the problem, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's Could the Republican House and Senate a few years ago with the presidency, could they have done some different things than they did? I complain because I wish they'd done a photo ID or an ID requirement. I often bring that up, but could there have been some other reforms? Are there things that could be done, federally, or is a lot of this the ability of the states to regulate themselves within the range? Is that going to always be sort of a problem?
Well, the states have a lot of power in this area, but the feds could help out a lot with the states willing to do that. Yeah, look, a voter ID requirement for federal elections would have been great, and there were Republicans in favor of that, but Democrats were adamantly opposed to it, and getting it through Congress, I think, would have been very difficult. And another thing that I think the feds ought to put in is a requirement that you have to provide proof of citizenship when you register to vote, because we've got problems with non-citizens illegally registering and voting all over the country, particularly in places like California, where California state officials don't care about it. In fact, they seem to encourage it, even though it's against the law.
We're talking with Hans von Spakovsky again. Hans, one more question on this crisis in terms of unrest. When you have, I always harken back to my time at the St. Louis Board of Elections, an urban Board of Elections. When you had security issues, and I didn't go through a situation where there was protests or rioting. but you'd have security concerns in a certain area of town or a certain polling place. You'd have to adjust things. What kind of concerns do you have about the intentional or just coincidental disruption of sort of our urban centers and others in terms of this rioting and things, and what it could do for the fall?
Well, hopefully it will have come under control by then, but we both know that if there are riots going on in November, organized by anarchists and others, right before on Election Day, that may keep people out of the polls. And, we've never had that happen in entire history, but as organized as these protests seem to have been all across the country, it makes you wonder, is the same thing going to happen again? I hope not, but we ought to be concerned about it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that as organized as it was, it just seems it wasn't organic. It was some of the concerns may have been organic, but the organization wasn't. Okay, Hans von Spakovsky, thank you as always for your insight, and over at Heritage Foundation and heads a center over there. He's a really great writer over at Fox, among other places, Fox News and other sites. Thanks, Hans.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll take a quick break and be right back. It's Ed Martin here in the Pro America Report. Be right back.